All right. Okay, thank you so much, and welcome everyone who is on the call right now. I think we just want to have a conversation today. I don't want to be like I'm coming to present something. Of course, I'm going to give you some figures, some graphs and things like that, but I really want this to be a conversation, okay? So we're really going to talk about the looming debt crisis, or so we are hearing, okay, in the Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, this work is work that was, given to us by the Open Society Foundation and then Transparency International. They contracted us to do this work because there were concerns in the development. When we talk about development, our development partners were beginning to raise concerns that most sub-Saharan African countries that were in the past had received debt relief were now beginning to see rising debt, public debt. And so they wanted to really understand the trends, what is going to be the implications of the rise in the debt for the economies. And of course, it has spillover effects, across region. And of course, this is, to me, a very important topic. I mean, why do I take this seriously? I mean, I got the opportunity to work with these two excellent individuals, my co-authors, in the person of Leonce Ndikumana, who is an expert on debt issues in Africa. He's written extensively on that topic, and I was privileged enough to work with him during the time I was doing my PhD, and I served as his research assistant, and then also he was my dissertation advisor. So I've gotten the opportunity to work a lot on debt. Before then, I worked at Bank of Ghana. Most of you may be aware that I worked at Bank of Ghana before I came to do my PhD here in the US. But what I was doing at the Bank of Ghana pretty much related to even this. I was working on financial stability. So I was overseeing the financial sector and then reporting to the Monetary Policy Committee. At the time, Paul Akwa was the governor. And so these were things that, have spurred my interest over time, got me to work on this, not just this, but also work on household financial stability. So my work really is on different areas related to stability within the household, within an economy, within the financial sector for one, and then also looking at issues of corruption, which I think we will talk about a lot as we go through this topic. So before I do that, I just wanted to get a sense from people what they think currently the Ghana economy is like. I mean, maybe, you may have heard about things about the economy. You have some idea about what is going on. I mean, do we think we are doing well in Ghana? I mean, how is Ghana's economy doing in your own view? I just want a few people to just share their thoughts on what they think about how Ghana is currently doing. Any thoughts?
Okay, so it's Kwesi here. These are my initial thoughts on Ghana. Being at a 74% debt to GDP ratio is very worrying. Mm-hmm. However, I think one of the things that this government has done really well is managing the macroeconomic conditions. So I think our currency depreciated approximately about 3% last year. So that is better in their cup. In addition, I think they've gradually been bringing down the cost of borrowing. I think the Ghana rate, the GRR rate, the Ghana reference rate, that's what they call it, is about 14.4.
Prime rate. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, I think they're doing well. My main concern though is the ballooning debt, and I don't know how they're going to bring that down. They say it's 74% now. In my personal opinion, I think it's already about 80%.
Yeah. So these are some of the things that we are going to talk about. Now, I want to put my work in perspective here. The key thing to bear in mind is this work was done up to the period we were looking at post the financial crisis. Okay, so up to 2019. And then, of course, as we discuss, I will talk about the current situation in Ghana. And so you get a sense of where we are, but I'm going to focus more on what is in our report so that at least everyone who refers years to it, we see the consistency with that. Yes, any other thoughts? I mean, when we are looking at an economy and how the economy is doing, what are some of the things that we often would look at? What would be something that you put your mind to as I want to look at how this economy is doing? What variable will you be looking at? What are some of the important things that you focus on? So just a few more. We've talked about the debt. What else?
Okay, I'm Charles Chapman here.
Okay,
so,
Charles.
I mean, my concern is if you say your economy is doing well, and from a layman's perspective, I mean, my background is finance as well. You go to the petrol pump, and like every 2 weeks, your fuel prices are going up because I mean, our fuel prices are more or less benchmarked against the depreciation of the cedi and the international oil prices. You go to the supermarket today and you buy something for 2 cedis today. 2 weeks time you go, it's now 2 cedi 50 pesos. Then I have issues that really doing well as a country. Are we going forward or are we going backwards? So those are just my layman's perspective of how I see things.
Good. So this is you talking about the issue of inflation, and then the fact that when we have these high levels of inflation, it has implication for the exchange rate. Of course, the exchange rate itself can, it works in two ways. But there's this bicausality in the sense that when inflation is rising, it can have implication for the value of our currency. Of course, when the value of the currency is also depreciating, it would have impact on the economy. And this is a very important aspect of this work. Again, we talk about how inflation, the fundamentals of the economy itself, can affect the rise in the debt. Okay, so maybe some of you remember HIPIC. I guess some of you may have heard about the HIPIC initiative. How many of you remember the HIPIC initiative?
I do remember HIPIC.
Jifa, do you remember the HIPIC initiative, the Highly Indebted Poor Country Initiative? How many of us remember HIPIC?
Yeah, I remember.
Oh, yes.
If I see Jifa's hands up. Jifa,
that was for a separate contribution. So when you're done.
All right. Go ahead and then I'll talk about the HIPIC.
Well, I was thinking that another matrix in terms of looking at whether the economy is doing well or not is how businesses thrive. If you have an economy where interest rates are running at something like between 26 to 35%, I don't think it allows people to realistically pursue a business that will grow and thrive and then contribute effectively to the economy. And sometimes I actually challenge your former employers, the Bank of Ghana, because they keep putting out this MPC rates time after quarter, and there is really no impact, or there's maybe no impact is harsh, but there's very limited impact on what commercial banks are offering people as interest rate. It's not a surprise that we have very high non-performing loans. We have lots of high debt rates among individuals who cannot meet their obligations. And I think eventually the banking crisis was a reflection of that aspect of our economy.
That's true.
Of us to provide credit to businesses, to provide realistic credit to individuals so that they can then contribute to the economy. So that's another measurement.
Thank you so much for that contribution as well. And you raise a very important issue about this interest rate. Okay, so whilst working at the Bank of Ghana, of course, I used to report on the non-performing loans. We look at the prime rate and whether indeed it is reflecting when we say the prime rate is coming down. The bank's rate, going in the same direction. The banks themselves will tell you they cannot push it down because of the high non-performing loans that they have. But in addition to that, when the government themselves are running significant budget deficit, and I'll talk about it in a minute for those that are not familiar with some of these terms, when we are running significant budget deficit, it means we now have to go out there and borrow within the domestic economy. It reduces the amount of funds that, the banks themselves will have even to give to private sector. We talk about that as crowding out the private sector, essentially because when you are borrowing so much from the banks, and we'll see how the domestic debt, the way we've categorized it, you can see that mostly the banks prefer to buy the government debt rather than loan the funds that they have out. And so naturally, we are not seeing funds going out, to the banks and the private sector, which is supposed to be the engine of growth. And so government running budget deficit is a very important aspect of this debt, and then also how it impacts the economy itself. Okay, so it's great that you all have some of these ideas already. I wanted to test the background before I get into it. But I asked the question about the HIPIC initiative. I just wanted to get a sense of the HIPIC initiative. How many of us recall the HIPIC initiative? If you recall anything about the HIPIC initiative, the highly indebted poor countries that Ghana signed up for at some point. How many of us remember this?
Yeah, I remember HIPIC. Yeah.
Okay, and so you all remember during that time. Yeah, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I remember HIPIC.
Yeah, so the HIPIC initiative.
I'm just going to say I remember HIPIC as well, and I remember that it was some sort of debt relief was cancelled.
Yes, so we had some debt that were cancelled for us by the IMF, the World Bank, the Paris Club, those that give us loans on concessional terms. Most of them cancelled some of our loans. And then, of course, the goal of the HIPIC initiative was just to free us to have enough funds that we could actually devote towards infrastructure development, or even, health sector, the educational sector, and the like. Okay, and this was actually between the year 2000 and 2005, because after the HIPIC initiative, we also qualified for what we call the multilateral debt relief. Okay, so within that period alone, we got about $7 billion of debt that was, freed up for us, cancelled in a sense, and then given to us to be able to develop. And several things have happened after that. This post 2008 and 2005, we've seen the debt rising, okay, and we are going to talk about that. So pretty much I want to really do my best and then present to you what our findings are from what we did in the analysis. I've told you a little bit about what exactly we're going to do. The goal was for us to really, get into understanding the trends, the patterns, what the implications are. So I'll talk about it in a minute, and then we'll look at, the debt itself, public debt, when we talk about it within Sub-Saharan Africa compared to other regions. Is it really the case that there is a looming debt crisis? So I'll talk about that. And then narrow down to the case of Ghana. Now, when we were given this contract, the goal was to focus on a number of countries. I'll give you the reason why we selected Ghana as one of the countries to focus on. There were 10 countries that, our development partners are all identifying as, these are countries that their debt are ballooning. So please, when you do the study, narrow down on them and let's see what is going on. So Ghana was one. Okay, and so Ghana became a focus of our analysis. And so I will just take you through some of the social and economic developments that Ghana has experienced during, the period post the MDRI, the debt relief that we received, and then look at how the debt, the composition of it, how it is shifting over time also, and then also talk a little bit about, the drivers, what is behind the debt accumulation themselves, what it means also for you. You may ask yourself, why should I even bother about this? Even if it is not impacting you directly, there is also there is the indirect impact. So I'm going to talk about that as we go on. So please feel free to stop me. If you have questions, you can raise your hands. I'm happy to just stop and clarify things before we go on. And then I think the last thing that I would want us to all talk about would be the strategies to grow with debt. I mean, debt is necessary. We need that because we do have significant financing gaps. I'll talk about that. But how do we grow? okay, in the era of debt. So that is something that we're going to have a conversation about. So I just want to show you some brief graphs. First, I'm talking about the Sub-Saharan situation before we come to Ghana. But just look at the graph, this chart that I'm showing, okay? This is data from the IMF that is just showing us how debt is changing over time. I picked 2012 because this was the post-global financial crisis, okay? And during this period of time, you know, some of the ODA, that overseas development assistance, that would typically flow into our economies, started declining around that time. So I pick up some of the dates for a particular reason. So here, what you want to look at is when a country is showing red, it just means that its debt to GDP, the public debt, okay, to GDP is more than 50%. GDP is the gross domestic product. When we talk about a nation, how a nation is doing, okay, we use that, we measure it either by income or expenditures or production, just to get a sense of how an economy is doing. And so whenever you're looking at debt, you want to look at it relative to a country's GDP, just to get a sense of where they are going. So the orange will show you that the debt is between 35 to 50%. And then, of course, when it is yellow, the lighter yellow, it is under 35. So I just want you to observe and then just tell me what you are seeing as I change. Now, 2014 is very important because, you know, we started having some problems with commodity prices. These are times when, you know, when we talk about commodity prices, we are looking at the kinds of goods that a country exports, okay? So in the case of most sub-Saharan African countries, the majority of them focus on commodities, primary commodities, agri, and then, you know, minerals, those primary commodities. We are not really exporting manufactured goods. And so if we are not doing that, when there is a shock in the prices of some of those goods, it can have significant impact on our current account balance. And then, of course, it can also lead to us, you know, ballooning with our debt. And so as you can see here, this was 2014, and then we did have a terms of trade shock. Just, you know, commodity prices declining led to, you know, deterioration in our balance of payments. And then, of course, exchange rate problems, it created a problem. So as you can see here, this was 2014. And then we look at 2016. This was an election year in Ghana, so you can just take a note on there as well. And this is 2019. I skipped the 2020 data because I just want us to focus on this. So just tell me, what are some of the patterns you see?
Well, I see debt levels rising generally across the continent, although it looks to me that some countries are doing better than others.
Okay. That's right. We do have some countries that do have their debt levels below 35, right? And then we are seeing a significant number of them with debt rising significantly. In the case of 2016, I'll highlight that as we go through the economic and social indicators for Ghana, and then I'll talk about it a little bit in that regard. But there was some improvement in 2019, as you can see here, because some of the countries that were red, some of them are now back to orange, between 35 and 50%. Anything else that anyone notices? What is some other thing that you notice aside what Kweku said? Are you with me? Is everyone here? Is everyone with me here? Mm-hmm.
It seems Ghana's debt is not going down.
Ghana is, in a sense, staying where it is, right? It is one of those countries that are having significant debt to GDP ratio. So very important to take note of what is happening in the case of Ghana, okay? And of course, this is just focused on Sub-Saharan Africa. So you see that the Northern Africa the countries are not part of this. We're just looking at the countries that are relevant in Sub-Saharan Africa. All right, so now we just want to look at a few key terms. I I thought it would be helpful for the benefit of those who are not familiar with some of these terms, just to define them. So here I'm talking about the government budget deficit, or sometimes you hear the fiscal deficit or fiscal balance. Now, this is where you look at a country and you look at how much it is spending, how much revenue it is raising, and then of course, if there are grants that the country receives, you look at that in addition to the revenue it is able to generate within its own economy. And then you look at the difference between the expenditures. Typically, if it is negative, which has been the case a lot, then of course, it means we are running a budget deficit. If it is a positive, then we say you are running a surplus. Now, when a government is running a budget deficit, naturally, it means that its expenditures are exceeding its revenue and it needs funds in order to meet up the expenditure. So what they would typically do is just to borrow, okay, to just make up for that. So to the extent that we do have consistent budget deficits, borrowing is something that we're going to have to live with, because we do not have the means within our own borders to meet the expenditures that we have. So the other term that you'll be introduced to is this idea of contingent liabilities, which is becoming a huge issue for most sub-Saharan African countries. Now, these ones, they have what we call the uncertainty aspect attached to them. So most often than not, government will guarantee certain loans for, some parastatals like state-owned enterprises, or sometimes it could just be a public-private partnership that has been put in place, and then they need a guarantee from government. And so when government guarantees some of those loans, yes, naturally, if anything should happen in the future, it will mean that the government would have to come in and take on that debt. In fact, in the case of Ghana, we are seeing that contingent liabilities, something that is not planned for, is always part of why our debt is ballooning. And I'll give you a few examples of that as we go on. And then, of course, the issue of bonds. Most of you who are with finance, you should know the term, but it's just a certificate of indebtedness, an IOU. It will have, the term of the loan, the IOU, how long you're going to, pay, the period of time it will take you to pay, the interest rates and all of that. It has certain information on that. But it is one of the means by which the government borrows, in addition to if they are receiving funds from concessional sources like the IMF, the World Bank, which I'll mention in a minute. And then default, if you are familiar with taking loans, you should know when you are missing payments of your debt. And then, of course, the reserves. Okay, so this is a term that I'll be using very soon. I want to make sure you have a good understanding of that. So typically, these will be held with the central bank. Okay, if we are making any revenues on anything that we export, some of these will be going into our reserves. Okay, so we'll hold them and then use them to pay debt or to buy imports. And then the institutions that typically lead our development partners, the IMF, the World Bank. Okay, so more often than not, they are coming in to help you if you are having balance of payment problems. For instance, if you're engaged in transaction with other countries and then things don't go too well, sometimes they come in to help. But they are there for several different purposes. Now their role is expanding in other areas. And then, of course, if you're a country, you go and assess loans anywhere, a lot of times the lender would want you to go through the IMF or the World Bank. You have to work with these institutions when you are talking about the loan. And so we'll talk about it in a minute. But as you saw from the graph that I showed, you can see that generally, the debt is being accumulated at a rapid pace in most countries, not every country, but most countries. And this is where there is the concern that there is a possibility that we are going to have another debt crisis like we had during the 80s, 90s, when most sub-Saharan African countries were in severe debt, and for which reason we had the relief. So of course, because we had benefited from HIPIC, MDRI, opportunities or reliefs in the past, these development partners are concerned that is it going to happen again? Okay, so that is the reason we were asked to explore the trends, explore the patterns, try to get a sense of what is behind this debt accumulation, and then focus on this. So my focus really is going to be on Ghana, but I just want to give you a few I want you to understand a little bit of what is going on in Africa, and then you can see how it relates to the case of Ghana when I focus on that. Now, the debt dynamics is what I want to talk about in terms of Africa. It's really, when we look at Sub-Saharan Africa, are we really, different from other regions? Now, first of all, it is important to understand certain thresholds. So let me take my time to try and explain this to you. The IMF and the World Bank typically have a debt sustainability framework where they use in analyzing how a country is doing or not. In fact, we do critique some of these ways that they do the analysis of debt. But again, we want to just get a good understanding of it. Now, with that, they come up with these benchmarks and thresholds that once you breach them, then we can say you are either at a high risk of being in debt, or you are going to be stressed very soon. So you are in debt distress in a sense. Okay, so they have what we call debt carrying capacity. So just like maybe you want to take a loan for a mortgage or a car loan, an auto loan, for instance, they would have to assess you to know your debt to income ratio and things like that. This is similar to what, they are trying to do here. They want to be able to, categorize you into certain groups. And so the debt carrying capacity will actually give an idea of the extent to which a country can borrow. So we do have these benchmarks, either you are weak, medium, or strong. Now, what they do is to derive what we call a composite indicator. This composite indicator is just looking at your economic fundamentals, okay? So your macroeconomy, how well are you doing? Are you growing well? In terms of remittances, so we come in here, if you are outside, you send remittances. This is very important in, determining whether we'll be in a certain category. And then, of course, we look also not only at that, the reserves that I mentioned earlier, the reserves that you have, we look at that. And then in addition to that, we have what we call the country policy institutional assessment. So this is something derived by the World Bank. And when the World Bank does that, they kind of do it for different sectors of our economy. Okay, so we are looking at social inclusion, we are looking at equity, we are looking at the extent to which we are mobilizing domestic resources for development. We are looking at different things like the fiscal authorities, what they are doing. So it's a lot, it's about 12 of them. And so they do what we call risk weighting it, like they weight it in a sense. And then they combine it with these historical data and projections of 5 years, 5 years historical data, 5 years projection. And then they also look at global events. How is the global economy doing generally? And then based on that, when they are able to create this composite indicator, they can say you fit in the weak category, or you fit in the medium category, or you fit in the strong category. In the case of Ghana, we fit in the medium category. So our debt, carrying capacity being medium means we must be within the thresholds in the medium. So for instance, where the PV is referring to the present value, we would have to look at the present value of your external debt in percent of your GDP export. For the case of Ghana, we have to have them within these thresholds, 40%, 180% of export, external debt itself, not the present value in this case, but here just looking at it, the debt service, we are looking at it in terms of export and revenue that are coming in. You need to be within these thresholds. And then also the present value of the total public debt in percent of the GDP. So for the case of Ghana, we have to be within 55% of our GDP, okay, when we look at the present value. So on that, they are able to categorize countries in terms of where they stand when it comes to debt risk, okay? So if you are low risk, then it means that you haven't breached any of these thresholds. If you are moderate, then it means when we apply risk, okay, so we decide that we want to, shock the system with an event. How are you going to do? If there is a shock in the global economy, interest rates rise up immediately, how is that going to impact you? If you breach that, then you are going to be in the moderate risk group. And then high risk is just looking at these thresholds. If you have breached them, then obviously we'll categorize you as being high risk. And then those who are in debt distress, those who have payment arrears, or they are not able to make payments, they go into default and the like, will put them in debt distress. So with that information, we are able to tell how countries, are moving in these different categories over time. And so this is just indicating what we had on the previous slide with data, what is showing for Sub-Saharan Africa. And so as you can see, the black and red is where we are focusing on. And since 2013, we can see that, the number of countries moving into these two categories are rising. Okay, and then the numbers that are in the low risk are declining. Okay, the case of 2020 is probably going to be different slightly from this, because some countries are going to really move up into the red or the black. So now we have about 18 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa that are in high risk group of getting into debt distress, or those who are actually debt distressed. Okay, so I wanted to show you the countries that are in this category. So here, look in the 2019 column, and as you can see, Ghana is high risk. Okay, so I'm just looking at it, just when the global financial crisis ended, looking at 2019 and then 2020 currently. Ghana is still considered high risk in 2020, which I think we are going to go into debt distress soon. But they argue, when I had interactions with people at Ministry of Finance, Bank of Ghana, but in particular Ministry of Finance, their argument is that we haven't gone in arrears in any of our payments, and so we are not in debt distress. So that is the argument that they provide. But this is just giving us an idea. But you can see a country like Gambia, South Sudan, they were in debt distress, but now they have moved to high risk, but it isn't still a good place. Now, the question we had to ask was whether Sub-Saharan Africa is different compared to the other regions, okay? And as you can see here, when you look at Sub-Saharan Africa, that is the first set of, numbers that I'm showing. Yes, in 2000, the debt to GDP on average for Sub-Saharan Africa was high. Now, when you look at it by 2018, this, because we are doing comparison, we didn't do for 2019. We had to get all the data we needed to do this. So here you can see Sub-Saharan Africa was just less than 50% on average. But then it did better compared to, those in the Latin America and the Caribbean. And then when you combine all the emerging markets and developing economies. So in a sense, it's not like it's just peculiar to Sub-Saharan Africa. The goal is to show what is really happening across the different regions. And as you can see, it is happening across different regions. Most developing regions are experiencing the debt, increase that we are seeing in Ghana, in Sub-Saharan Africa. So the question is, what is really behind this rise? Okay, so there are a lot of factors behind them, and we categorize them into internal, that is happening within your own country, or external factors. And some of them, you have to think about the global financial crisis. Like I pointed out earlier, as a result of the crisis, most funds that were flowing into our economy, declined. And so if you were expecting receipt from overseas development assistance, they are not coming in. Naturally, it's going to have implication for your plans that you have. And so since that time, we've seen developments where, most countries are experiencing significant rise, because the multilateral lending, bilateral lending have all decreased because these countries experience financial difficulties. And then, of course, exchange rate deterioration. When the value of your exchange rate is, going down, it means that your debt obligations would have to be paid more, because you have to change more of your currency in order to pay the debt that you have. Then, of course, I talked about the terms of trade shock. When we are having our commodity prices decrease significantly, naturally, you wouldn't have enough revenue that you can even put in your reserves to pay debt and all that. So that is a very important aspect of this. Now, another thing is the financing gaps. When you look at investment and saving across the region, it is significantly, a problem. It's a huge problem. We are not generating enough savings on our continent, and investment is supposed to keep pace with the savings that we have generated. So with the financing gap needs, we have to borrow, right? And then the low interest rate environment. Now, in most international capital market, it's been easy to get loans, right? And so again, it has stimulated the desire to get a lot of loans. And we'll see what Ghana is doing in that regard. Now, when it comes to this low interest rate environment, it is important for us to relate it to the issue of sustainability. Okay, so we look at the relationship between how a country is doing or a region is doing relative to end interest rate. And here we just looked at it on average. So here, I just want you to just take a minute and stare at this graph. Again, economists, we always talk in graphs and, equations. So sometimes it may be hard, but I just want you to look at it this way. Now, prior to the 2000s, what was happening was that when you look at average interest rate, it was significantly above. So you can see the blue line was above the rate at which we were growing. And typically, when interest rates are above your rate of growth, it just means that you cannot pay the debt because you are not generating enough, income within your own economy to be able to even get the tax revenue that you can raise funds to pay off some of these debt. So naturally, we refer to that period, most of the period from 1975 to before 2000, as a period where debt growth was pretty much unsustainable. Then you look at post the 2000s, and you can see that during this period, we are seeing a significant rise in growth. On average, most Sub-Saharan African countries are doing well. And in fact, when you look at the top 10 fastest growing economies, the majority of them are in Africa. So it's a good thing. But post 2015, we are seeing that the switch, we have the switch again. Interest rates are rising faster compared to the regions, in terms of growth. And so that is a problem. It means that we are getting into the era of unsustainable debt growth. So let me pause for a second and see if there is any question before I continue. I just want to make sure that you can digest most of the information that I'm giving you. Any questions?
There's a question in the chat.
Hi.
By the way.
Okay.
Hi, Theresa. This is Quabs. I don't know if you can hear me. I have a question.
I can hear you.
Fantastic. Thanks for this. This is super helpful. Thank you so much. Perhaps the obvious question, if we have continuous years of this unsustainable growth, where does that take us? So I guess if we look at the end of the first period you talked about, we had HIPIC. So that took out a lot of debt for us. Yeah. So where does this then take us? Does this mean we will need another HIPIC at some point unless we have faster growth, or is there some other thing we need to be looking to?
Thanks so much, Kobna. This is a very important issue. And I think before we started the conversation, I was talking with Chris and I mentioned that, in fact, there are talks that we should begin to talk about getting debt relief again. And so I know that there is conversation going on because, again, when I did my research, I had to meet a lot of people. Sometimes I skip names because I don't want to bring specific names into this conversation. But what Ghana is doing right now is that we are juggling debt. What we are doing is we are borrowing from the international capital market. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. And then we are using it to pay the debt that we owe in the past. And so most of the loans that are coming in, even though we are talking about the fact that we are going to keep investing in infrastructure, the majority of them are also going to pay back past debt. And so how sustainable is that? We can't keep borrowing to pay, debt. And so how do we go about that? Now, I always talk about the issue of debt by looking at the principal agency problem, right? And so the loan is originating from one party, and then the recipient, okay? The recipient is the agent. The principal is the one who is giving you the loan. And there are interests on both sides. And so if there is a problem that is arising from the loan that has been given, I think the two parties need to come together and deal with it. The majority of the burden, of course, will lie on the one who is receiving. But at the same time, there are perverse incentives on the side of the person who is lending to you. One thing we have done, and this is based on the research that we did, I was part of with my one of my co-authors, and we have seen that, for instance, when it comes to external debt that comes in, now let's say there is $1 of external debt that is coming in. research is showing that 60% of that, that is 60 cents of that, goes out immediately after we receive it within the economy. So the question, we refer to that as capital flight. So we are receiving the debt. It's supposed to be used for something, but it's flowing out. More than half of it is going out. And these are illicit flows because, again, think about it. When you have, these debts and we say we are giving it into this ministry to, start this project or build this facility, there's a lot of things that goes on. There is no way we are able to actually track the amount that, we can track the amount itself, but how these funds were disbursed in a way that we can actually generate some benefit from whatever projects the funds were applied to. So these are issues, and I believe that, I love this conversation because it raises the issue of the corruption that is within our system. We are seeing all these funds coming in. Where are they going? What is it doing to the economy? And are we having to go back to this? Because when we are characterized as a country that is, in debt, it is a problem. And it's poor, not like a rich country that is in debt. We are in debt, but then we are not showing anything that says that, okay, the debt was used for this, So it's a huge issue. And I think, we can have more conversations today on that. I saw a hand up and I missed it. So I don't know if you still want to ask your question or add something to what I've said.
Yes, I do actually. It's quite busy again. So it's a follow-up to Kwab's question. My understanding is you cannot be highly indebted or you cannot go through a HIPIC program more than once. So I guess we are more or less saddled with the debt unless obviously our funders or the donors are generous enough to cancel the debt.
That's right.
For me, my question is, and I think it's probably a question on everyone's mind, what exactly have we been doing with all this money that we borrowed over the years? And why aren't we, as a country, developing? Because as you rightly said, it seems we are just borrowing from Peter to pay Paul at the moment, which is not sustainable.
Yeah. So that is a broader question for all of us. One sad thing that I can tell you, even getting the information to do this work, just focusing on Ghana, was hell for me. I imagine that, okay, having worked at the Bank of Ghana, I knew so many people. I knew Dr. Addison. I knew, people at Ministry of Finance. I should be able to get information. No, it isn't like that. Getting the information out for everybody to see what is going on, somebody feels that their job is on the line, and so they cannot give it to you because politics is embedded in all of that. And so it was a huge challenge. There were certain things we wanted to do, we couldn't. We wanted to really be able to assess. For instance, we assessed this amount of loan from the international capital market, Eurobonds. Where did it go? You want to assess it. They'll tell you it's in the annual debt report. Look inside, you see what it was done with it. Now, I always talk about this. I give this analogy. For instance, when I am beginning a trip from here, I tell you that I'm visiting you, let's say in London, I'm visiting you. When I begin my journey, I let you know I'm coming to you. You know I'm in the air when I'm coming from the US, obviously. And then, of course, when I arrive, you are away. So from my destination, the origination of the trip to the destination, you know my path. You know where I was and everything. You are able to track it. That is not the case with the debt that we have in Ghana. We are able to say, okay, this is coming from here. Between the time and when the time it was originated and the time that it is paid, what happens in between there is mostly shrouded in secrecy. And I think this is where we really need to have a conversation. What are we going to do? Do we need to set up an institution that can actually be an independent body that is assessing, what monies are coming in? What are they being used for? And all of that. These are things that I think we need to talk about, because to give you the breakdown on my side, I can't do that because I don't have that information, detailed information for most of that. Yes, there was a question from Tony. Tony, go ahead.
Hi, Theresa. It's Antoinette. Thanks for this very useful conversation. So I put a comment in the chat earlier, and it's almost along the lines of what Kwabs and Kweku have been talking about. So revenue generation seems to be a problem in Ghana. And obviously we've raised a lot of debt, but I don't see, at least on the face of it, I don't see what the debt is being used for to turn around some revenue generation projects that will help pay back some of these debts. So of course, it's a vicious cycle. We've actually just been borrowing to pay off debt, etc. And when you look at the structure of the debt, a lot of it is also cross-generational. We are almost locking up future generations into debt, but we are not putting any projects on the books that would generate revenues over the period. So my question to you is, in the area of your research, did you prefer any solutions to this seeming conundrum that we have? And if we are not able to go back under HIPIC to get our debt written off, what do you think the options are for us as a country to get out of this red hole?
Thank you so much, Tony. So I do talk about it. For instance, in our paper, we didn't just focus on Ghana. So we had to focus broadly on all the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. So our recommendations were generally broad. And of course, I believe that once I get to that slide, we will have a lot to talk about in terms of what are the options for us. Now, we talk about the fact that we can't go into HIPIC. Bear in mind, now Ghana is a lower middle income country. With that status, most of the loans we are getting are non-concessional loans. So you can't say I'm repudiating a loan. You have to pay it. And so even though we are hearing the talks of them asking for debt relief, the whole point is to get, these borrowers, the lenders, to just agree to either reduce it or restructure some of them in a way. But honestly, it isn't something that they'll be willing to do because, again, we don't have a lot of these concessional loans that will qualify for relief. And so that is the problem. But for me, if I'm talking about the specific case of Ghana, we need to look at the institutions that we have, in place to deal with the issue of debt. When it comes to managing debt, it is between the Ministry of Finance, the Controller and Accountant General's Department, and Bank of Ghana, with oversight from Parliament, of course. But if we have leaders that are very much aware of everything that is going on, then we should get them to be asking questions. Where is this funds going? What are we doing with it? We need to be raising questions as to what is going on. It looks to me that it is just the central bank that is acting as the policeman to check on what is going on. And of course, for us, if we are getting the data, we just want to look at the bigger picture. We don't want to look at each individual loan. Where is it going? That is something that we need to have an institution that is overlooking, because if we don't do that, we are going to keep going the way we are going. And of course, it has implication for later generations because they would have to bear, the payment of this. And I pretty much would, get to that section where we can have more conversation about some of the strategies that we thought would be helpful for most Sub-Saharan African countries to take in order to get out of this, debt rise. So I don't know, I probably haven't answered your question to, a good extent, but hopefully as I go through it, we can get into some of those topics again. Is there any other thing, any question before I go on to look at the case of Ghana? Are we good? Are we all on the same page? I like to check and just make sure. All right, so let's quickly look at
just a quick one, Theresa.
No, Jifa.
Just a quick one, Theresa. I just wanted to ask, in terms of solutions, even though I know you are headed there, wouldn't it also be important for the international financial institutions to amend the nomenclature? Because you say Ghana is a lower middle income country, but the reality is we are living like rich people when we cannot support that kind of lifestyle. We're trying to build interchanges and all these, capital intensive projects, which we cannot support. So maybe, in as much as I'm not seeking to absolve us of blame in terms of how much money we borrow or how we utilize the funds we get, maybe the, should I say, experiment of altering the nomenclature, who is poor, who is middle income, lower middle income, maybe it's all wrong. And so we need to go back to what it was before. And it's one of the reasons we keep redenominating. So I'm just wondering if that would change, would that probably improve things for us maybe?
I mean, at this point, we are already far ahead after we declared ourselves, I mean, with those institutions, we declared ourselves. That was from July, I think, 2011, if I'm correct. So we're already 10 years into this particular category that we are a lower middle income country. And I guess, I mean, this is a conversation that our leaders need to be having. But the question is, do we really fit into that category, given all that is going on? And I believe that is a bigger conversation that we all can have about that. So that is a great point that you make. We only make the case that, our development partners, you need to sit down with, these countries. Typically, when you're going to take a loan, we need to put in place certain measures before we actually, give the loans to them to do whatever they claim they are going to do with those funds. Now, whether we are classified as low income, middle income, or whatever, the loans will definitely take them. Because if you look at the patterns when it comes to taking loans, it hasn't really changed, except that we are now getting more involved with the international capital market, just as a result of being declared as a lower middle income country. It's giving us that leeway to just access international capital market. And that is what the government really wanted at the time that they were requesting for this. So pretty much it's a conversation, it's a bigger conversation that I'm sure some people may have ideas on, but a conversation between our leaders and of course the development partners may be necessary on that. So thanks for that, all the questions that have come. I just wanted to give you some ideas regarding the numbers when it comes to how we are doing in terms of our economy, okay? So please bear with me. A lot of times people would say, okay, we are seeing these numbers, but it's not reflected in our pockets. It's not reflected in our day-to-day life. And so again, I mean, I'm just telling you what the numbers are. Now, when you look at the fastest growing, economies across the world, this is just looking at it for Sub-Saharan Africa, but even across the world, Ghana has featured in for a couple of years until I think 2016, 2017, thereabout, that we were not in. But this is it. When you look at the case of 2012, you can see that Ghana ranked 7. We were doing very well. In terms of, this is looking at GDP growth itself, okay? So GDP per capita growth, when you look at GDP per person, compared relative to our population, you can see that GDP per capita was also doing well. This is important, again, when you think about it in relation to the interest rate that I was talking about. And then you look at 2016. 2016, we left the top 10. We were not doing as well. And I try not to be political about some of these things, but we all know that 2016 was an election year. Typically in an election year, you would see that there is a significant, increase in other things that were going on. We did see significant, expenditure from the side of the government, but why did we not see growth? The goal is, where are the funds that we are raising, or the expenditures that we are undertaking, where are they going towards? Is it recurrent expenditures? Is it public investment? Are we investing those funds well? This may be explained by the fact that maybe the expenditures we saw significantly that time was not going towards activities that could spur on growth. I don't know, but 3.4 isn't that bad, because if you recall the rule of the 70, even when a country is doing very well, let's say a country is, running about 7% growth in GDP, then in 10 years, we should have a doubling of our GDP. Okay, so that is the idea here. But again, just to see what the numbers were for 2016, Ghana GDP per capita growth was just 1.1. And this was the lowest that we had experienced since 1983 when it comes to GDP per capita growth. So that was a very important point to take note of. And then also in the case of 2019, we do see this, okay, so 6.5, and then we look at the case of the GDP per capita 4.2. So very interesting development here. Now, I looked at the economic and socio-economic indicators because it's important for us to understand what is happening. On average, how are we doing when we look at the GDP numbers okay, when you are measuring production within the economy, you look at the GDP growth. So these are decadal averages, okay, in the 90s, and then in the 2000s, and then 2010 to 2019. And we can see that we are doing well when it comes to the average numbers. Like I pointed out, if we are able to sustain this, then of course, it means that we should be able to repay. Then the issue is, how do we deal with our revenue generation in terms of, generating enough revenue to be able to deal with the infrastructure need or the social and the development needs that we typically have. So very important to just take note of that. In terms of poverty, we also wanted to understand, how are we doing? Because remember, the goal is by 2030, we should have eradicated poverty, okay, in Sub-Saharan Africa. But in the case of Ghana, this is how we are doing. By the end of 2019, the average is, when you look at it, at least 11.3%. That is, these are the numbers that are living on $3.20 per day. And then, of course, the percentage of the population that are living below the poverty line is 31% compared to 71% in the 90s. So we are doing well, but we have a long way to go, again, with that. Now, the current health expenditures is very important to also put this in perspective, okay? So typically there is a benchmark that you need to look at when you are looking at the amount of money going into the social sector. For instance, in the case of health, you want to make sure that you are spending anywhere between 4 to 6% of your GDP in health. In the case of education, it is a little higher than that. But then the issue is, it's not just about throwing money into a sector. It is about what the money is really doing. Is it towards infrastructure? Is it towards skills, improving skills? And things like that. Okay, so we do see the numbers. We are seeing mortality rate when it comes to children dying at the age of 5. We are seeing that it's declining, but I think there is more that needs to be done. We really need to look at that, because I'm not seeing, when you talk to people, you get a sense of what is happening in our Ghana health sector. So that is another conversation we can have. We look at the educational sector again, it gives you an idea of what is going on. We are looking at getting parity in terms of the girl-child, education. For instance, the gender parity index. We want to make sure that every girl child can get into the secondary education. But again, we see that it's 0.9 currently. It's not bad. We need to be at 1. We are working on all of that. So that is interesting to take note of. But let's go on to look at the debt, okay, themselves. I had a table that I was going to show you how Ghana is doing relative to Sub-Saharan Africa, but I don't want to bore you with too much numbers. I just want us to look at some of these graphs just to make sense of what is going on. So 2006 is post the debt relief period, okay? So at that time, we had been able to bring down our external debt amounts significantly. So as you can see, in 2006, the external debt was just 3.1. I shouldn't use just, because 3.1 billion is a lot of money. But again, it was 2.2, sorry. Then the domestic debt was 3.1 billion. Now, as you can see, over time, domestic debt is becoming prominent, okay? And when domestic debt is becoming prominent, the question is, what are the interest rates within the economy? And that is where we are beginning to get worried, because the interest payment on domestic debt is significantly high because of the high real interest rate within our economy. So very, very important to take note of the cost of these loans that we are taking domestically relative to the cost of the loans externally. Now, this is the growth of the debt. So as you can see, the blue line is reflecting the year-on-year growth for external debt. Okay, so as you can see, external debt is around 16%, okay, year-on-year by 2018. Now look at the case of domestic debt, 25%, okay, year-on-year growth in domestic debt. So naturally, that is responsible for the significant rise in our debt, okay? So very important to take note of what is happening in that regard. Where are the external, when we break down the external debt, where are these from? Okay, so as you can see, because I mentioned, Ghana is no longer, one of those countries that qualify for concessional loans. So as a result of being a low middle income country, we do not get certain loan facilities that previously we qualified for. And so now we have to engage in the international bond market. So the red is showing us how we are doing when it comes to that. Okay, so since 2013, we've really been involved a lot in the capital market, international capital market. So you can see that. And then, of course, commercial loans are coming down slightly, but multilateral loans are also there. It's declining. The prominent one is the Euro bonds that we are getting into the picture now. And then bilateral is also not as much. And then, of course, when you talk about the Chinese loans, it's reflected pretty much in the commercial loans. So we can talk about the Chinese loans again. Now, this is just showing us, the countries that have been going on road shows. We talk about it as road show. You're going on a road show. You are issuing a bond on the international capital market to raise funds to come and develop your country. Look at the case of Ghana. So Ghana, just as I mentioned, from 2013, we started going to the international capital market. After we were declared that we were low middle income country, we decided to start this. And so almost every year we are going. Last year we raised about 3 billion just before the pandemic hit, and the IMF gave us another facility. So you can see all the things that are going on in terms of raising funds on the international capital market. It has huge implications for us because, again, even if it is a long-term loan, we have to be making payments yearly, and then, of course, the principal would have to be paid at some point. And this is just showing us the Chinese loans. Let me point out, it is hard for us to get information on Chinese loans. So to get that information, even from Ghana, it was quite difficult to really decipher where are these Chinese loans. Some of them are collateralized in the sense that they'll give you some funds in exchange for your commodity. Okay, so this is what is going on for most of the Chinese loans. This data that we have here was just made possible by Johns Hopkins University, that is doing their best to just look into newspapers to track these Chinese loans, because the Chinese loans are difficult to monitor. Okay, so these numbers we are seeing here may not be a true picture. This was just up to 2015. We couldn't have, data for a longer period of time, but it's just to give you an idea that yes, Ghana is engaging with the Chinese, but it's not as Angola, Ethiopia, and Kenya. They seem to be, at the top front when it comes to this. But again, these numbers may not give us a good picture of what is really happening, because like I said, they are doing what we call, giving you a loan in exchange for certain commodities that you have. What you may have heard the case of, was it Indonesia, one of these Asian countries where they did that. And then when the country could not pay, they go and take over the resource. If you took the loan to build a particular facility, they can take over. If it's, for instance, for a port where you are bringing in items and they take over. And so we need to be cautious about the Chinese loans. That was something that we highlighted in our report. Now you look at the domestic debt. Who are those holding the debt? And here we show the categories. The majority of it are being held by the banking sector. So that explains why interest rates are so high. They are not giving out loans because they are taking on a lot of the government debt, crowding out the private sector. If we are not giving out loans to the private sector, we cannot develop. And so this is a huge issue. And I think we need to think about how we can develop our domestic capital market that will help us to diversify those who are actually holding some of these debt. Okay, we see a significant number of the non-bank sector coming in. So that is a good sign. That is what we want to see. We want to see that some of these debt are being held outside, not the banking sector, so that loans can flow to the private sector for growth. And so it's interesting just to take a look at that. And then here, I just show you the maturity profile. Now, typically, when you are holding short-term loans, then it means that when you have to pay it within a certain period of time. Short-term loans, usually anywhere between 3 to 5 years, you have to pay them back. But then the medium to long-term loans, at least it gives you a little bit of grace period, okay? And so the strategy, the medium-term debt strategy by the government is to move away from short-term loans, because they want to make sure that at least we don't have to pay some of these loans quickly I don't know, but that is a very important aspect of, the loans. And so the maturity profile gives us an idea what is happening. Now we see that the majority of the loans, over 82%, are medium to long-term loans. So that is interesting to take note of also. Then we talk about the drivers. Okay, so let me quickly go through the drivers and then I'll take some questions. The drivers in the case of Ghana, like I said, going to the roadshow or going on the roadshow, it's because of the low interest rate environment. It's easier for us to get to the international capital market. Then our lower income middle income status is important because now we don't qualify for a lot of concessional loans. And then the terms of trade shock that I talked about, Ghana's case was similar. Ghana is, in a process where we are taking all these high, investment, infrastructure development, and as a result of that, we are borrowing for some of those. Okay, so the question is, how are we really, doing with some of those funds? That's a discussion that we can also have. Now, the contingent liabilities, like I mentioned at the beginning, these are some of the problems we are having with, the problem with the debt. Okay, for instance, the financial sector cleanup. I mean, if you have a deposit insurance scheme, you need to make sure that if there's a problem within a particular sector, you absorb that. And so that is one of it. It wasn't expected, but to get it done, they have to spend so much. So we know how much went to that. About $3 billion went to that. There are others. I don't list all of them here. We know about this public partnership between the University of Ghana and Africa Integras projects. They were supposed to build some facilities at the University of Ghana and provide certain, hostel structures and the like. Now, if they are unable to pay it, government must take over and pay it because they guaranteed that loan. And then you look also at some other project. This is the Teshi Nungwa Desalination Project. And again, if the particular institution that took it is not able to pay for it, government must absorb some of those. So the contingent liabilities are huge. And that is the worrying cry we are hearing. The debt, most of the domestic debt, some of those we are really worried about. But again, contingent liabilities is also something that we can have some control over. Then the interest payment. So this shows us the interest payment. Look at the interest payments we are making on domestic debt alone, okay, compared to external debt. Now, external debt are not as costly currently compared to the domestic debt because the cost on domestic debt are huge. And so that is what we are seeing. And if you look at it relative to, our revenue generation is a significant amount. And so that is a worrying sign also for us. Now, I think I've spoken a lot. I just want to take a few questions. I have 2 or 3 more slides and then we can get into some conversation. But let me just pause if there is a question before I continue. Are we good? I just want to make sure that I'm not, taking all the air away from people. Are we on the right page? Just to know so that I know you are with me. Okay, great. Okay, so let's continue and look at
we're good.
Jipa, did you have a question?
No, I just said we're good.
Okay, all right. So let's quickly look at the implication for the Ghana economy. I think that is the one that is going to generate some of those discussions. Okay, so here, like I pointed out, if your debt levels are rising, you cannot generate enough domestic investment because you have to borrow from the banks like we are doing. And then as a result, we are not giving out loans. Interest rates are so high. And so because they get a lot of returns on just taking the government loans. So that is a very important aspect of that. This affects labor productivity. So you may be on the call, you are wondering, how is this even, related to me? If you're an entrepreneur, yes, if to the extent that we do not have enough resources devoted to the educational sector, it affects the skill set that are coming from the labor market. And so it will have long-term implications for businesses. So very important to understand that. And then also in terms of cutting down, these are the things. When you are cutting down your public, expenditures just because you have to pay the debt, yes, that is a worrying aspect of that. It can affect our accelerated growth. It can affect poverty reduction. Also, it will make it very difficult for us to meet our sustainable development goals that we have listed. Now, I just want to show you some of these. You may ask, we are impacted in different ways when government is running some of these huge debt. Government is using most of its revenue generation to pay off debt. Yes, these are some of the things that we can expect to see. If you are driving in town, of course, the roads are bad. It has implication for your pocket, and you cannot go anywhere around that. In terms of schools, we are seeing the quality of education in the country being impacted negatively. These are some of the things that you can expect. Yes, we are not devoting enough resources to this. Yes, we would have some of those problems. Health facilities. Do we have enough health facilities? If we have huge debt, we cannot devote resources to, improving our health sector. And so this is it. Most of you remember, there was a time where I think Dr. Bawumia had to travel, the vice president had to travel out of the country for health, healthcare in the UK, if you recall. And then, there were concerns. It raised the idea that we do not have a good health care system. And so if we have these huge debt and we are not devoting enough resources to some of these areas, it is important. It can also cost human lives, okay? The human cost of it, loss of property. If our fire services do not have, the resources that they need in order to provide what we need when we are in need, then of course it creates problems for the economy at large. There are several different ways that it can impact us, but I just wanted to give you a few points on that. And then this is just showing us, I want us to discuss whether the debt is sustainable. So I just put together this table. This is not in our report, but it's just to give you an idea. This is the 2019 numbers. As you heard Kweku mention, the debt is now over 70% of our GDP. Okay, we have accumulated close to 7 billion, within just the last year after this report was done. And then as you can tell, if you look at the debt per person, it's about, we're looking at it in terms of dollars. So 12,280. You look at GDP per person, it's about 1,800 or 1,884. Now look at the GDP growth. This is where I have some bit of confidence that if indeed we can sustain this level of growth, then of course, when we look at the projections when it comes to these interest rate, the interest rate on domestic debt. Now, the IMF World Bank are projecting that, the real interest rates on domestic debt are going to go down. So we should have, we shouldn't be worried. And that is where we critique some of the analysis that they do, because they do the analysis using some of these projections with some expectation that that is where we are headed. And then it turns out we are not headed in that direction, and it impacts us negatively. So we critique some of the ways they go about it. But if indeed that is what is going to prevail within the next couple of years, with sustained GDP growth and GDP per capita growth, we expect that we should be able to repay the loans if the interest rates are within these manageable margins that they are predicting for us. Now, I talk about the rule of the 70 in relation to the GDP growth. Okay, so if an economy is doing very well, and we are saying that we are growing at 6.8 or percent on average. I know last year we didn't do well. That was a blip. We have to think about it that was a blip. Assuming that things get back to normal and we are able to sustain the level of economic growth, then of course, what it means is that our GDP numbers are going to shoot up in the shortest possible time. And an example is this, where you have the real GDP growing at about 2%. If that is the case, then of course we expect that our GDP will double. Currently, it is around, close to 70 billion. We should get it to double. And that is the idea. We want to see improvements within our economy. So the goal is to maintain the current, trend that we are seeing. It is really important in that regard. Now, we have breached our threshold. So naturally, we are in the high risk category, like I mentioned. Okay, so typically we say that for you to have your debt to be sustainable, it has to be around 40%. Now, the IMF themselves have this debt carrying capacity where they have decided that it should be 55% for Ghana. But then as you can see, it's above that right now. And then when you look at, the different thresholds, we have breached almost all of them. I don't show all of that here, it's in our report, but then we have breached almost all of them, okay? So definitely we are worried. One of the items we are worried about, contingent liabilities, the domestic debt, it's all important for us to be worried about. But then if we are going to have sustainable debt, then we need to be running budget deficit, budget surpluses. That is what we need in order to bring our debt back to normal. And that is not what is happening right now. This is just showing you the fiscal performance, between 2008, 2019. And as you can see, we are running persistent budget deficits. And of course, we always say we are within a target, that the target is 5%, right? Last year, 2020, I hear it was about 11% of our GDP. Now, that is an issue for us to worry about, because to the extent that we are running persistent budget deficit, then we cannot be mean reverted. We cannot get back to deal with some of these problems that we are talking about. So it's a very important issue for the government to take note of, which we made, we made the points we made in our report in regards to that. Now, these are some of the things. So in terms of what are the strategies? So here I'm just putting all of it up. Okay, and I think, it talks for itself. I'm pretty much done. This is my last slide. So it talks for itself in terms of what can we really do? Domestic resource mobilization. The tax base currently for Ghana is significantly low. And so we know that we do have a strong informal sector. Most people are not paying taxes. And so how do we deal with that? I know we are talking about the address systems and going to help and all of that. I mean, we are not paying taxes. So that is another issue that we need to be worried about. Borrowing smart is one of the things that we recommended. We talked about the fact that most of the loans that we are contracting as a lower middle income country are very expensive. And so we need to begin to now think of strategies to borrow in a way that we are not going to be inflating the current levels that we are. One of the things that we proposed was that, when it comes to debt negotiation, again, we do have the principal, we have the agents. Now, if one party has so much information and is able to utilize that information against you, you end up on the losing end, right? And so one thing we are thinking of is that most Sub-Saharan African countries need to come together to negotiate some of the loans that they actually, get on, or either it could be the international capital market, which is not something we can do much about, but the others, the multilateral loans, bilateral loans, we need to think of ways in which we can coordinate with each other and borrow smart to bring down some of these, the costs that we are looking at. And then, of course, when they talk about the issue of strengthening governance, the issue of transparency, we do have a lot of leakages going on. Now, like I said, the analysis we've done over years are showing that when you think about the amount of external debt coming in, for every dollar that comes in, close to 60 to 80% are leaving the continent. And so we need to think about it when we are giving out contracts, the different things that goes on. I mean, these are things that we don't talk about explicitly in our report, but of course, behind it, you should understand what is going on. So in terms of strengthening governance, we need to be transparent about these debt. We need to know the origination to the destination, where these debt are going, so that we can actually know what they are doing for the economy. Setting up and then ensuring, that there are rules in place to avoid, the contingent
the presentation.
The contingent liabilities that we are talking about. So we need to set rules. And that is something that we had a conversation with the Ministry of Finance. They have said that now they have certain rules in place to check some of those. And then, of course, we have to diversify away from our commodity focus. We focus too much on our primary commodities. When there is a shock on the international market, it affects us negatively. We need to diversify away from that. And so we need to think about, putting in place certain policies that can ensure that we develop. So back to Jife's question about, the infrastructure that we are talking about. Yes, we believe that some of those are helpful if it can generate the kind of investment within the economy that can boost our growth in a sense. Okay, so sometimes we need to really look at it, the issue, and then determine, is this really worth it for us? We have to think about it. And I think that is something that we can converse about today. And then, of course, we need coordination between our development partners, because they have to really put in place certain rules that will ensure that the loans, once they give them to us, we are also using it well. And we can't tell what goes on in between. And these are the problems that we are thinking are leading to some of the leakages, and then also the debt ballooning for future generations to handle. So I guess I will rest my case here, and then we can begin our conversation on the topic. Thank you so much for your time, for listening to my economic lecture. All right, Nana, go ahead. Nana had his hand up. Nana, could you please speak?
Sorry, there's so many Nanas, but I put my hand up too, so I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether it's me or someone else.
Okay. All right. Let's have the first person go ahead.
Okay, I'll go.
Okay.
And if there's another Nana, you can feel free. So I'm going to ask, and this may be pretty simplistic, but like the issue of the Chinese loans. First of all, thank you so much. This has been super insightful. Do we have no choice with the Chinese loan issue? Like, is there no other choice? You see, it's almost like countries literally mortgaging off their future. And I mean, you know, like maybe it's either the Chinese or some private investor from somewhere comes in, you know, buys off like the whole country's, I'm exaggerating, but the country's whole iron mine or whatever, and then sells it. Like those, they sound like movie stories, but they're happening to us.
That is the truth.
Do we have no choice? Like, do we have to borrow from the Chinese and
we do have a choice. Now, let me just talk about a little bit about this. We talk about this global imbalance that is taking place, and mostly it's because there is so much resource in the Chinese, economy. And so they are trying to figure out ways where they can, diffuse some of it. Now they are taking over Latin America. They've taken over most part of Central Asia. They are giving them all of these resources. We need to strategize. And when we talk about borrowing smart, one of the things that we mentioned is, for instance, in negotiating some of these Chinese loans, African countries need to come together and try to make sure that we are having the same kinds of terms and putting in place certain measures to ensure that what has happened in Central Asia, where Chinese people are taking over their resources, they don't happen to us. Because that is what is going to happen. In the case of Angola, that is so exposed to the Chinese government, I think that is one of the conversations they are having. And for me, I would say that Ghana, we haven't gone too deeply. Of course, we don't have all the numbers, so I can't tell the extent to which we have gone. From the data that I saw, the debt from the Chinese government isn't as much, but like I said, they are actually collateralizing that with our commodities. So that is the other thing that is going on. And we don't have an estimate of that. And so it's the interest of our agents, because the agent is supposed to act on our behalf. And if they are acting in their own interest because of what they are gaining from that, then our interests are put aside and they deal with their own interests. And then we would have to pay for it later. But that is something that leadership needs to take into account. But like I always say, we are starting the conversation now. There is something that we individually can do. I believe that some of these issues with transparency should come from us. We should be, speaking out about what is going on. Because if you are a family and somebody contracts a loan, how it affects your health, your family, your financial health, it's important to the entire family. You need to know what is going on. So it's a conversation, but I think it's important for us to see how our leaders are playing out in this scenario. Yes, there is another question. I see the 3 hands raised, so anyone can go.
Peter Ken, I think.
Peter Ken, yeah.
Peter Ken, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, the dinosaurs are trying, man. I think my question, I may not sound very economic literate, forgive me. But every so often we hear these voodoo data that kind of come up in Ghana. And upon that, we get this GDP and what have you. How accurate are these data and how are they accrued? Because I don't know what the Office of the Statistics Office do and how they get these data, but I've never trusted them. I don't know how you, as an economist and the people in the financial sector, how they rely on this data as a trusted source for decision making.
So one thing, let me just point out, I mean, there is no way we can do our work without, information, right? And so the question is, where is the data coming from? The Ghana Statistical Service is responsible for some of, getting the data together. Now, there are different ways they go about measuring this. And for us, our role is really not to look at whether the data is genuine or not. The key aspect of it is that we do have in place, measures to ensure the way we are recording is consistent with what is done internationally. So we do have in place, the way we go about it, we follow what the IMF standards, the World Bank standards are. But again, we want to make sure that these are data that we can really use. And there are different ways to reconcile the data. So, there are certain areas that are being reported to this section. There are certain data that is being reported to another institution. These are all things that we reconcile. So for instance, when I worked at the central bank, one thing that we do is, when we get the data, we sit down to look through and look for inconsistency, because you're going to report it to the Monetary Policy Committee. You don't want to go and then look like, how do you explain this? There has to be a pattern. There has to be some consistency from the different sources of data that we are getting. And so once we do get these basic things done and we are convinced that we're on the right track, there may be some discrepancies here and there, but it isn't really something that we have so much control about, but we try to check in different ways to reconcile them. So I don't know if it answers you, but again, I mean, regardless, even here, there are definitely going to be inconsistency in the advanced economies in putting together some of these data, but we do need the information. So we try our best to reconcile the best way possible to utilize the data.
Thank you very much.
I think Kweku and then Daniel and then Mamia.
Yes, Daniel.
Sorry, I'm not sure whether you can hear me.
I can hear you now.
Right. Now, in your presentation, I heard you make mention of advocacy groups. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure about what the influence of that is, because my main question is around how to strengthen, because people like me, I live in the UK, and I'm listening to this out of interest because my wife gave it to me, gave me the link, and I decided to tune in. And listening to it sort of gives you a bit of concern. So I'm a bit concerned about some of the information that you provided, because it's quite good information. But what it tells me is that government needs to do a bit more. And the fact that you are struggling to get some of the information, especially around things like the Chinese loan, is a big issue. Now, my question is, how do we strengthen advocacy groups to who would then push for transparency of data and have the ability to monitor? I mean, people like yourself seem to have the expertise to monitor and analyze these data, the data in such a way that you can actually explain it to people like myself, and then educate the public, and most importantly, influence the direction of government policy.
Great question, Daniel. So thank you for your question. I will do my best to see how I can answer that. Now, we do have certain, groups, like, for instance, Institute of Economic, is it IEA, Institute of Economic Affairs? Yes, we do have the Center for I've forgotten the name, for governance. There are different institutions that, organize talks, conversations around some of these issues. And I think it's important that some of these conversations begin, from there. The problem with some of these different groups are that sometimes there's political bias, right, in some of them. And so if you want to really have an objective group that can actually advance the interest of the public, then we need to look beyond these institutions that engage the government on some of these issues. And I think that should come, journalists are one of those areas that we can think about. What are journalists doing? Picking up on some of these topics and then getting the conversation started. Yes, I mean, for us, we are technocrats, right? So we do the data analysis, we'll talk about it, we'll try to understand what is going on behind the scenes, but there isn't so much we can do other than just share our work and then get the conversation that needs to happen, and then get these people to be on their toes. I really believe that is one area we can channel some of these concerns through. So journalists are another way, but different groups. Even students on campus, you have to have groups that are interested in holding government accountable. Do we have some of those? We could get some of those things started. I don't know the extent to which people get interested in some of these issues, but the key thing is, even if you are being impacted indirectly, you are being impacted, and it should be a source of concern. So that is one of the ways I can think about it. But I mean, I'm certain that there are others on the call who would have other ideas on how we can get started on the conversation on the topic.
Can I have a brief follow-up, if you don't mind?
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, that's a very good answer to my question. And my point is that when we talk about journalists and the other organizations that you've mentioned, the issue for me is that they can be influenced politically.
That's right.
Now, what I'm thinking more about is a group of interested Ghanaians. I mean, I'm interested in economics, I'm interested in finance. I don't work in economics, I don't work in finance, but I have a basic understanding of both areas.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm thinking about is like-minded people. I don't live in Ghana.
Mm-hmm.
The policies of Ghana don't influence me or affect me directly, but I count myself as a Ghanaian. So I'm deeply interested in what happens out there. So my question is, people like yourself who have the knowledge, is there any way, I know you don't want to get into politics, or I believe you don't want to, but is there any way in which people on this platform could start some sort of, grassroots organization where we don't engage in any form of politics? We invite people like yourself, experts who have a deep understanding, who will come and talk to us, but then find ways and means of channeling some of that information into the media so that ordinary Ghanaians would actually hear this, so that when politicians actually stand on the platform to campaign, they are actually hearing things that are actually relevant to Ghanaians as opposed to platitudes, So that's what my question is. And so whilst this question is to you as a person, I'm sort of putting it to people on the platform and asking whether there is scope for us to develop some sort of advocacy group that would invite specialists like yourself to come and educate us.
Yeah. I mean, I am open to this, and of course, that is why we started this. And I think the talks that our group has been having the past few months, the goal is just some of these. And I think with issues like this, that it's critical. I think that yes, we could get some of this started. I mean, it's on all of us on this call, but I think it's something that I'll be very, very much interested in. Like you said, I'm not interested in politics. I just want to focus on my research and then tell the story, and I'm happy to share what we find,
Okay, thank you for that.
Kweku and then Mamia.
Right. Thank you, Chris. So there is one problem I think we all talked about, or I think you alluded to earlier, was the domestic revenue mobilization.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is only 12% of Ghanaians actually pay taxes. And for me, the interesting bit is, and I'll give you an example. I have my dad-in-law is one of those very prim and proper people, and he's the one who actually follows up with the local authority to pay his property taxes. Okay, and even if you go there and say you want to pay your property taxes, it comes as a surprise to them. And yet, I thought it was legislated that everyone has to pay property taxes. So, my point is, what exactly is this government doing to increase, domestic revenue mobilization?
That's a very good question, Kweku. So in the past, at least just based on when I was at the bank, some of the conversations we had, I'm glad that once Dr. Baumia got into politics, he brought some of those, issues on board, like, getting the address system in place to be able to track some of those, different areas, to be able to get people to know that these are people that can pay taxes. But the question is, do we have an institution in place that is going to ensure or enforce the payment of taxes? I mean, this is something that, we have to put in place certain mechanisms and create incentives for people to actually pay. Like, for instance, when I moved into this country and then I needed to get my kids into school, they asked me, the first year I got here and I started my PhD program, they asked me, I came with my daughter. My daughter was just 2.5 months old at the time, and I had to put her in school. And they said, we need your tax return to know how to charge you, how much you're going to pay for childcare and all that. I didn't have anything. I said, well, let me check with the Ghana Internal Revenue Service and see whether they could get it for me. And they were able to get that for me. And that is just because I was working in a formal organization. There are a lot of us, if you were asked to get that tax return, you probably wouldn't be able to get that. And that is because there is no incentive for people to pay. We don't have mechanism in place. For instance, you're going to access this particular thing and you go to the bank and they say, can we have your tax return? Things like that are not required. And so people don't have or don't see the need to pay any taxes. And those who would actually go, for instance, let's say we talk about the fact that the market women, they are tax collectors who go through there taking taxes. The monies don't go to the government. We know that. I mean, it's flowing elsewhere. So do we have the institutional framework to get that done? We don't. And that is where we need to push. I'm hoping that is something that the government can do something about before they leave office. But otherwise, it's really a problem because the tax base is really, really low. And so we can't get enough tax revenue generation to do what we have to do. So we have to borrow to make up for the shortfall. So interesting, but I guess others have points on that they could also share with us. But I don't see anything happening currently that is going to generate that unless we put in place the mechanism to incentivize people to do that. Kweku, do I answer your question? Did I answer it? I know there's a frustration on everyone's part. I know when I was at the bank, I did have a lot of colleagues that would go to the AMA to go and pay their property taxes and things like that. So for us on the call, I mean, if we do have property, I mean, I'm putting up projects in Ghana, but I don't pay any yearly, taxes because there isn't an incentive. But I mean, recognizing that we need this, going, I realized that this is important. We need to do what we have to do because each of us have a role to play. And for instance, you go to some places, you make the payments, the bribe that is being taken from you, right, to be able to even access certain services. It's ridiculous. It's even greater than the amounts that you have to pay, actually, in terms of the taxes and the like. So we have a huge problem. We do have a huge problem on revenue mobilization.
We'll go to Mamea and then Nana.
All right, so Theresa, excellent insights. I mean, I'm just so intrigued by the information that you shared. One thing though I wanted to hear is unemployment. I know, the first question you had asked was, what are the things that we kind of know or sense would help towards an economy improving or not improving or kind of being stagnant? We mentioned a whole bunch of stuff, but somehow unemployment didn't come in. And I feel like that unemployment aspect is very critical to an economy being successful or not. Here in the US, when things are really bad, unemployment goes up, right? And then when things get better, unemployment numbers goes down. Do we have can we gauge or do you have information about unemployment in Ghana? And if so, how was that even impacted in your economic measures?
Okay, that's a great question, Mamia. This is actually in the report. So when we wrote the report the first time, we did have information on unemployment when we look at the youth and all that, you know, categorizing it into the gender groups and all that. We did do that. And of course, I mean, I can't say it off my head what the numbers were, but we typically, when we want to put this in context, yes, unemployment is a very important variable that we need to look at. So we did include that in our analysis, but I can't think of my head what the numbers were specifically, but it is in our report. So I can check it, either the initial report or something, I can check it. But again, once the GDP is, you know, rising, we're expecting that we should have a fall in unemployment. I think that was the trend that we saw. If I can quickly share the report on Ghana itself, you know, I did the report itself, and I think we looked at the Ghana one and the unemployment one. I don't know where exactly that was, but I can share that information with you, Mania, later.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm blown. This is exciting. Thanks.
Great.
I think Nana is next. And then Kwame and then Kwabs.
Hi guys again, Theresa. So I'm just wondering, in the research and in all the work you did, are there any African countries that are doing it right, that are on the right path, whether it's towards debt sustainability or eradication/elimination, if that's even a possibility? And if there are any such examples, you know, who are there, what are they doing, and is there any way Ghana can learn from that?
Yes, that's a good question, Anna. So this is something that was even interesting when we're doing the work. Rwanda, we highlighted Rwanda so much because Rwanda was doing so well. And we said, you know, we need to look at what Rwanda is getting right, you know. And my co-author said, we don't have to just highlight one. I don't know. Sometimes I want to think about, he wanted us to be kind of neutral, not just highlighting a particular country as, you know, the one to look at, because the system they have in place is different for most Sub-Saharan African countries. But I think Rwanda is doing well. There's no question about how they are managing, you know, their debt, their fiscal, you know, performance is awesome. They are doing excellent. And that could be a model for us. You know, Botswana is great. But again, when you look at the case of Botswana, because they have significant amounts of minerals, so they are also in a different category. But again, they are also one example that we could also look at. But I will highlight these two, Rwanda and then Botswana, as examples. And I can provide more information on their specific numbers because we did aggregate and then just focused on Ghana, Kenya, and then Uganda, and then South Africa briefly. We didn't get so much into the Rwanda story and then the Botswana example. But yes, these would be some examples or models to look at.
Thank you. If I could just follow up quickly on that, I'm just wondering, so what, like, I feel like there's a link missing between, you know, sort of the information that you and your colleagues, experts like you, have been able to put forward and decision making at the levels of leadership. You know, most, I'm sure, you know, people in positions in Ghana, I'm just using our country as an example, would know, at least to some extent, they should know some of these factors when they're going in to sign for loans, etc. So like, looking beyond, you know, the information you've been able to put out, how do we make that link happen so that they're not signing off, you know, our country, our future, our commodities? Like, how do we do that? You know, it might feed a bit into what Daniel had asked about in terms of advocacy or having some mechanism to demand accountability. But, you know, it's really frustrating to think some of them are experts too, so they should know.
It is.
Thank you.
Now, let me tell you that when it comes to some of the you know, like I said, debt management is not just, you know, Ministry of Finance and Controller and Accountant General. The Bank of Ghana is pretty much involved. Some of them are concerned about the levels of the debt. And of course, I mean, ideally, we should be getting the information easily, but it's a political issue, right? Because at the time we were doing this research, you know, we knew that the election year was coming. And so you want to be careful what you are putting out there, because, and I'm not talking about from my side, I am providing you with the information, but from their side, they are being careful because they don't want the information getting into the hands of the opposition party that can be used against them. And so I did get it. I mean, I saw the politics. I was frustrated. I was angry. I mean, I came back and there was some information that I really needed. And I was just trying to get them. Eventually, the person who even helped me was an older Chimotan, an Akora, who was actually at the Ministry of Finance, who was able to push most of the information to me. He was like, why shouldn't we give this information out? This should be public information. There is a real problem getting the data. You know, at Bank of Ghana, people that were my colleagues that I went to Legon with, you know, they were my genius. Now they are, you know, big people. And so these were people who met me and they were like, oh, we'll help you. When it came to giving me the data, no, my job is on the line. I'm not giving you that data. It was frustrating. Very frustrating. If it wasn't the Akora who was at Ministry of Finance who pushed the information for me, it wouldn't have been good, even getting some of the information that we need. But we are saying, when it comes to, you know, dealing with the problem, it isn't easy on the part of us, those doing the research. It is something that has to happen in terms of the advocacy group. We need to have that kind of conversation and see how we can get them on their toes. First of all, we need to be transparent. We need to have an institution that has the data that is showing the loans that are coming in, what they are doing, where it ends. Is it being used in a way that will ensure that it will repay itself? If it isn't, we need to be able to keep track of some of these things. And that is what we really would advocate for in the case of Ghana. For the broad Sub-Saharan African region, we couldn't just talk about some of these specific concerns. But yes, in the case of Ghana, that would be one to think about. Yes, I see a lot of hands up. Please go ahead.
Kwame Clotte.
Hey, hi, Theresa and everyone. Good evening. Theresa, thank you very much. And I would like to echo the thanks across the group for a very interesting presentation. Some of the, I believe some of us economists were you know, apprehensive at the start, but I think at the end we're all you know, on a very good page. My question is twofold. So when you started the presentation, you had a graph, a bar chart graph that looked at I think it was the distribution of debt from 2013 onwards. And the question is, why 2013? What happened in 2013? You know, why did that data point?
Should I answer that before you ask all the other question you have, or do you want me to answer that first?
Yes.
Okay, so the goal was to look at post the financial crisis, right? So the financial crisis, the global financial crisis was between 2008, 2010. And so post that period, we wanted to see what was going on. In the case of Ghana, bear in mind, I was talking about the fact that we got the lower middle income status from 2011. And then right around the ending of 2011 until middle of 2014, we had the terms of trade shock, where commodity prices began to decline significantly. So it's always helpful to look at specific dates and then begin to see what is happening from there. Then you can make a case of what. So it was pretty much post the global financial crisis. We want to see what is happening and then trend it onto to date.
Oh, fantastic, because there's a tendency for things to be colored in red, white, and green, red, white, and blue colors. So it's very interesting that you can make that, you know, distinction of that 2013 date is because of this reason. So recently, the finance minister said, you know, and I think it was an FT, about how Africa is, you know, not being given the short shrift when it comes to these negotiations, and you know how our debt is priced. Do you agree with that view? And in the context where, you know, our multilateral donors, Britain, Denmark, and co, are now looking inwards and, you know, cutting back on their multilateral donations, you know, aid. I mean, do you expect is the situation going to get worse? I mean, what can we do if, yes, we believe what the minister said, that, you know, when we go to these markets, you know, we're being given the short shrift, and then the guys who would give us the soft loans are also looking inwards. I mean, do you see the situation worsening then, you know, with COVID, that kind of stuff?
Great question, Kwame. I wish I can answer it totally. My sense is this. I mean, we are definitely being given the short end of the stick in the sense that we are not given good terms when it comes to now that we are engaging in the international capital market, but that is not to blame on those individuals, because obviously, if we are doing something right within our economy, we shouldn't be borrowing as much. Of course, it's because we do have these financing gaps and we don't have any opportunity to access concessional loans. And because the advanced economies themselves are struggling, so they can also provide us with so much ODA, we can't keep relying on them. We have seen, we have weaned ourselves from the IMF's, oversight in a lot of things that we do. So why then do we want, to just get something else outside of what we have currently available to us? The only problem is this: we are not getting the opportunity to negotiate terms that are beneficial to us. So when we do the negotiations, it often will benefit those who are giving the loans to us, and then it is to our disadvantage. Now, bear in mind, the person who is taking the loan is taking the loan on our behalf as, citizens of Ghana. The loan is being contracted on our behalf. What is that person's interest in accessing that loan? What are the benefits that are going to go to certain groups as a result of that? Let's assume that the interest for the public is greater than the interest of the agent themselves. So hopefully, if that is the case, that is great. Then, of course, it means that when you are negotiating, you have to negotiate it as it is for you yourself, in the sense that you are going to pay for it. And if we are not in that frame of mind to negotiate things that will be beneficial, or in a sense, in the future, we should be able to pay it off easily, then naturally, we are not getting the better end of these negotiations. So when we talk about the borrowing smart that we mentioned, we said that because African countries are not getting a good deal when it comes to negotiating loans, we need to come together and we need to have a united front, and we need to set in place certain measures and how we are going to negotiate in a way that benefits us. That is the only way we can go about some of these things, because most of us are negotiating these loans separately, and we are being given different terms. Some get good terms, some get bad terms, and therefore we are all, some are losing, especially if you get a bad term on a loan. So we have to think of this collaboration among ourselves and then have a front that is able to negotiate in a way that will be beneficial in the longer term. So those are some of the thoughts. I don't think I can answer it completely because I don't go in terms of negotiating this. Negotiating of the loans is done by the Ministry of Finance. So they initiate that. We need to make sure we have the people who are doing this job do it right. So that is what I would say. I don't know if I answer your question, Kwame, but that's the
little. No, fantastic. It's just, I think it's one of those thought processes. I mean, on your academic side, I guess one of the things to start thinking about is, a game theoretic model of how, if you play this game of bad negotiation, bad loan, and you constrain it in time, then what happens? But that's talking technically. But very thoughtful answer, and very, I guess, as you say, if we don't learn how to do this well, we're not going to get any better. The outcome's going to get a bit better. That's the answer, basically. Cheers.
All right, thank you, Kwame. Let's Kwaps.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks to everyone for the insights and the questions, and to you, Theresa, as well. Very good conversation. Just a couple of points. The first is that it feels to me, in my little experience, that the policymakers, they actually know the data. So they look at the data and they know the data, but for some reason, when the data gets into the political realm, the decisions that come out of it don't follow what the data says it should. So there appears to be something about and maybe Daniel was touching on some of this as well. How does the body politic, how do the civil society organizations, how do we put pressure on the decision makers to actually take decisions that fit what the data is telling them that they should? Because if you had dinner with a senior person from the Bank of Ghana or the Ministry of Finance or any of these other places, you would have a great conversation about what should be done. based on all the data that we are talking about and more. Yet, when the decisions have to be taken, we don't see the decisions that we expect. So I don't know if you've seen any models from other places where people have been able to bring this kind of pressure to bear, maybe mobilize the civil service, the civil society organizations, and the body politic, people like us, in a better way to force better outcomes. So that's my first question. The second thing is, one of our biggest problems is that we have a big informal sector. So one of the issues is we don't know where, you talked about address systems. We don't know where people are. Kweku Agbesi talked about 12% of people paying taxes. We can't track them so that we can get them to be part of the formal economy, so that we can tax them so that they can basically pay their fair share. Again, are there places you've seen where people have been able to bring large numbers of people? So Rwanda was a good example, but Rwanda has 3 million people. So it's a good example, but you're not talking about 30 million people.
That's right.
Botswana is also a decent example, but again, Botswana has a lot fewer people than us. So I was wondering whether it doesn't have to be Africa specifically, but just in the frontier and developing world where there are slightly larger populations where people have been able to bring people into their formal sector so that they can be taxed. Either their income can be taxed or their properties can be taxed, so that you can tackle this revenue problem. Because you talked about debt to GDP, but in the end, we service debt with revenue. So if we can't get revenue, we can't really service it. So some thoughts on these will be very helpful. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, Kwabla. First off, I mean, when we did our analysis, our focus was pretty much on Africa, comparing it to other regions. There are different countries outside of Africa doing great things. My plan had been to just focus on the Ghana story and then really determine some of the different ways that we can address the leakages that we are talking about here. I mean, of course, we do have policymakers that are doing, some things just because they want to deal with some of these issues, but it's not enough. And so what more can we do? I can't give you specific example of a particular country in an emerging economy that has done this A, B, or C, or that. I have to look into it and then probably be able to share back, with the group. And like I said, once I take this study further, of course, this is an ongoing work. We are still working, trying to look at post-COVID, not post-COVID. Once COVID came into the picture from 2020, what is going on? So as we get into some of those topics, I guess in the case of Ghana, it will be interesting to look at other regions and see what specifically we can do. What lessons can we learn from this region to replicate? So that's what I'll probably say about that. In the case of what the policymakers know, yes, most of them know. I mean, I said, I did have conversations, and they know that what we are doing right now is debt juggling. They know the picture, they know what is going on, but they don't have a lot of control over some of the things that are being done. Like I said, we have 3 different institutions that are responsible, to manage the Ghanaian debt. And so all of these institutions will have their own reservations about what is being done here and there. But again, there has to be that coordination coming from leadership top. It's actually supposed to come from top down. So even though they know what can they do, it has to come from the top. And so it's a lot, but I can't get into some of the politics of the issue on that front. My work is pretty much just to focus and see what is going on, what can we do. And so it's great that I can look into some of those examples and share. Okay, Kwabla.
Thanks so much, Theresa.
Kwame Obing. Oh, it looks like okay. I mean, Theresa, I'll take the last question. I'll ask you the last question then, if nobody else has a question. Oh, Na seems to have a question. Winston. Okay. My question was regarding the. You talked about how at the moment it seems like nobody is making sure that when we take the loans to build infrastructure, we are not following through to make sure that these infrastructures are built right. in the first place, and making sure that these infrastructures are fit for purpose, right? How do we ensure that the political parties and those that govern us, whenever they sign up for these loans that they say they're going to build, let's say Kumasi, Accra, whatever, train line or whatever it is, we can take them to account and make sure that these infrastructure projects are fit for purpose, because 20 years down the line, we will have to pay that money back at some point. How do we handle that?
Great question, Chris. Again, that is an issue that, the politics of our country. I don't know, but I think we do have in place the public debt procurement law or something that lays out what has to be done, from party to party. This government was in power, this loan was contracted when that government was in power. Another government comes into power. It lays down some of those. I have to look into it and then really share. I did a brief, summary of some of the things on in our report on Ghana, the Ghana report. I don't think I went into detail about the transition from party to party, how some of these should be done. But that is the problem that we are witnessing. If NDC had a project it was doing, NPP comes into power, it stops the project. The loan was contracted for that project, but because the new government comes into power, stops it, we still have to make payment for that loan, but that project has become a white elephant. So that is something that, yes, I believe that the laws should be able to address. If we do have consistent laws in place to deal with some of these transition issues, I don't think we should be losing out on some of those things as we are currently. We are really losing out on a lot of that. There are a lot of instances. About the SHS, construction that was done by the NDC government. NPP comes in, abandons some of those, and then, we have to pay for some of those structures. Yes, there are issues. The laws are what I believe should help in dealing with some of these things in the transitions. So, Chris, I don't know if I answered it thoroughly.
No,
but
that's perfect. I'll give the floor to Nia and Winston.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Theresa, my question is on. Hi. Yeah. So you mentioned that Rwanda was doing quite well in Africa.
Yeah.
So I wanted to find out from your research. Okay, what would you say Rwanda is doing in terms of their debt management or the debt profile that Ghana can learn from?
Well, great question now. So one of the things that we looked at was in terms of how sustainable their debt was, whether they were in the thresholds, what they are doing in terms of the loans that they are contracting, what they are doing with them, how transparent they were with the loan. And so there was a report that had been done specifically on the case of Rwanda, highlighting, how they have been running persistent, surpluses in a sense. When things are going well, they are running those surpluses, so they are building up reserves, getting loans that are targeted towards specific infrastructure. There is a lot, like the things that I'm mentioning here, transparency in regards to some of the loans that are being contracted, the use. People are actually seeing what, the result of the loan is. They are seeing all of that. There is a lot of transparency in that regard. The structures that they have put in place in terms of their institutions are pretty much helpful to deal with this transparency issue. We don't have those kinds of institutions in our case. And the reason is, if someone knows that if this is in place, it can prevent the leakage that would be beneficial to them. Obviously, it prevents that. That's why it's important. I always mention this, that when we talk about radical leadership, you come with this interest that this is what I want to do. You do it, even though there will be repercussions, either in elections or whatever. You do it as you know it's right. Do it, and let everybody know that, yes, you stand for this. But fear of what could happen, to me or to the people who actually helped me to get into power and all of that prevents some of them from putting in place those institutional mechanisms to deal with, the debt issue. So they are doing the different things that we are talking about, advocating for here. Most of those are being implemented there.
Winston.
Thanks.
Sorry, no. Winston, do you want to unmute yourself? Yeah. It looks like you're saying something, but we are not hearing you.
Listen, if it helps, you could also type it.
The line is not clear from your end, Winston. We are not hearing anything you're saying. It's like a robot speaking.
Yes, I've muted myself. I'm clear now?
Yes.
Much better.
It looks like you went off.
Yeah. Kwame, you put your hand up.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And Theresa, thank you for that very powerful presentation. Brilliantly delivered. I think it's a good start. Now, I didn't hear you talk about the effects of corruption, bribery, and corruption.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is it better? Is it better?
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that behind some of the data you churned out, I'm sure we can see bribery and corruption in there. Behind every bad deal, every bad negotiation, there's the belief that, people do some underhand dealings. There's some bribery and corruption somewhere, especially in Africa, where the cost of corruption runs into billions of dollars. And this can affect our growth and development adversely. Are you able to isolate corruption, bribery and corruption, to see its effects on some of these things that you talked about? What is the role of corruption, bribery and corruption in and some of these
All right, Kwame, I think I got your question. So that is a great question again. This is the topic that I mentioned, the capital flight issue. So we've done, Kwame, are you still speaking, or I can go ahead and respond? Okay, I think I can respond. All right, so this is what I was talking about. For instance, we have done research that is showing that for every dollar of external debt that flows into Sub-Saharan Africa, between 60 to 80% of that goes out. So 80 cents, okay, maximum goes out. It flows back in the form of illicit flows. So in that sense, a project is given, the project has kickbacks, it has, shell companies that are created with the creation of those shell companies for, government officials, family members, some of these funds are siphoned. And then naturally, it leaves the shores of the economy. And then, of course, we end up having to pay for them. So it's hard for us to just say it just based off of the numbers that this is the amount that is due to corruption, right? So I can't just say that this is the percentage of the amount of debt that is going towards corruption, but at least there is research to show that this is what happens. Now, the problem is if you don't have in place the institutions that can monitor what is going on with these funds, then yes, that 60 to 80% of the funds are going to keep going out. And so the issue of what we are talking about, creating an advocacy group, getting civil society to be very much involved from the origination of the loan to the destination, whatever is going on, being transparent about it. This is what is going to bring down that estimated number. that this is the amount that is flowing out, even with the domestic debt. I mean, the analysis that we have done is just on capital flight based on external debt. And so when we go behind the numbers, we are able to distill from the balance of payment information, distill from the debt information, what is really flowing out of the economy. So that is, yes, that is there. And in fact, the next aspect of our analysis is focusing on some of those, trying to explain the numbers behind it. But research that we have done in the past is showing that. So we need to see whether still we are within that margin, 60 to 80% of external debt flowing out when it comes in. We need to look at it again and then see whether we have reduced that number or we are still within that range. So I don't know if it answers you, but it's work on capital flight. I do have other things that I can recommend for you to read, to get a sense of some of these things I'm talking about. Kwame, does it answer your question? Looks like Kwame is up.
Yeah, he's there, but I think he hasn't got a stable connection. So
okay, all right.
We'll ask Winston to unmute if he can.
Hello, Chris. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Loud and clear, sir.
Okay, cool. So good evening, Theresa, and good evening, everybody. I just want to go back onto the subject of debt sustainability. I always believe that the Minister of Finance job is one of the most difficult to do in Africa, because you will always have to do some magic. The revenue you get will never be equal to the expenditure you have to put out. And that's what leads us to going into markets to borrow, etc. Given Ghana's situation, if you were supposed to advise the Minister of Finance, okay, knowing very well that if I'm thinking about a situation where I'm sure the Minister of Finance knows this. He knows very well that if I can grow at 7% or north of 7% for more than, let's say, 7+ years, right? I'll double my GDP and I'll have this debt. So sometimes that is probably what feeds into the attitude from the ministry telling you that debt sustainability was a big deal. We just need to grow. If we go north of 7%, we'll double our GDP and we'll bring the debt below, like to what? So a sustainable 35, under 30%. If you were to advise the minister, would you say that this should be the first thing you should tap? Because you have given a number of solutions. Would you say that, okay, focusing on growth and deliver GDP growth above 7%, sustainable for more than 7 years, would it be a key policy you would tell them to pursue in resolving this problem? Thank you.
Great question, Winston. Again, thank you so much for some of these very great questions that you're all asking. Now, the issue is, yes, I can say to him that, yes, that 7% growth, if we can sustain it, then within 10 years, we can double our GDP, and that would be excellent. The other thing is that if we don't have the institutions in place to make sure we can collect taxes, generate revenue from our economy, then we'll still have these gaps. So it is important that this is going in line with the domestic resource mobilization efforts that we are talking about, because our tax base is significantly low at 13%. The last time I checked, I mean, this was a long time ago, so maybe it's improved a little bit, but it is low. So with that, we can have the economy doing so well, but if we have the leakages, the funds will not come into the hands of government. We'll still use this little revenue we are generating to pay off the interest on the loan, let alone even thinking about the principal. Now, the other thing that we have to think about is the new commitments that we are making, the new loans that we are making. Yes, of course, because we have a low interest rate environment, it makes sense, because if our GDP is growing much faster than the interest rates that we are seeing on loans, then yes, we can keep borrowing, but we need to make sure we are negotiating the other terms that come with not just the interest rate, the other terms with the loans, okay? And hopefully, as we extend the maturity also of our loans, not just taking medium, but longer term loans, it's also going to be helpful. But my worry is the fact that when you look at the data, what we are doing right now is just taking the debt from one point, using that debt to service the other debts that we owe. And that is not sustainable. That is not something we should be doing. We are doing what we call debt juggling. Taking debt and doing it this way, it's not going to help us. We have to really strategize and think about that. So yes, there are different ways to go about it. The growing GDP, of course, we know is the best way to reduce poverty, the best way to get a standard of living high. But we have to do it in addition to creating the institutions to ensure we are getting the resources to stay within the economy. Winston, I don't know if it answers your question, but that is my thoughts.
I think it does. Thank you.
Okay. Daniel had his hand up.
Yeah, I think Daniel wants to say something.
I'm really sorry. I think I've spoken enough. Chris, I know you. I'm not sure whether you know who I am, but I know you quite well, Chris. So probably I'll be speaking to you privately about this side of things. But I can see the passion. I can sort of hear the passion, and from the kind of questions that we've got so far. And what I'm really, really worried about is the fact that possibly we'll finish this conversation and that'll be the end of it. I mean, my wife, I didn't go to Motown. My wife went to Motown, and when she gave me this link, what I said to her was that I'm not going to listen to it because it's only going to depress me. Now, it hasn't depressed me. It's made me a bit sad, sort of confess all the things that I already knew. But what I'm asking, it's a question to everyone who is here today, is I think I started a conversation around advocacy groups based on something the presenter said. And my big question is, should we commit to nothing big, just having some sort of presentation once every year, once every quarter, once every 6 months? I don't mind. I mean, if it's every quarter or every month, that would be great. But should we start committing right away? Because I believe that Ghanaians, we have brilliant, intelligent people like yourself. Is it Esther, the person who is presenting? Sorry,
It's
the person
Theresa,
it's Theresa. Yeah, my
resident
apologies.
economist.
My apologies, Theresa.
So
So now
you put me in such a high, I just do my work as I should.
No, but it is comprehensive. It's quite
comprehensive. But I think this question from Daniel is to everyone. I mean, I am interested. I'm going to be part of it. If you want to do this regularly, I'm happy. But again, it's to the entire group. So we can have.
So what I'm asking is if we can agree on whether at time frames. I'm not really concerned as long as we get the information. But the idea is, I mean, Theresa, you are in the know. You have such a deep knowledge about these things. And what I'm asking is, if guys on this platform would agree, we will have a forum where every month or whatever time we agree, yourself or you can invite someone else who is in the know to come and join us and sort of educate us. And then what hopefully over time we can think of doing is getting some journalists involved, and then we can sort of having some sort of influence in terms of what goes on in our homeland. And so this is a question to everyone. And Theresa, I'd like you, and because I know Chris and I know Kwame Clotte, maybe you guys can sort of put your heads together and we can start something.
That is excellent. I'm all for it.
Daniel, I know you very well. You are an honorary Akora.
Absolutely,
in a sense.
absolutely.
So we will take that initiative forward. But the main aim for these talks is to help us understand what's going on around us, tap into the expertise that we have within the group, and make sure that we can harness these brain power to come up with some ideas that will help us maybe influence decisions or the development of Ghana and our whole collective body, effectively. that's where we are going with this. So it's not just something we are saying now, but it's something that we hope we can continuously evolve and develop going forward into something much better.
Thanks for that, Chris.
Theresa, it looks like the questions have stopped coming. And
yeah.
so I would want to say a big, massive thank you for you've really been going for almost 2.5 hours. And
really?
So, yes. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much too. Excellent.
Next month we have Mamiya coming to fill your shoes. So I'm sure she will be ready as well.
Yeah.
But I think these things that you've talked about, you've really broken it down to a level that mere mortals like myself can understand. So I suspect everybody else understands it as well.
Me too.
Thank you so much too for having me. Okay, I really appreciate the fact that you all made it to the conversation. I really appreciate it. Staying even till the end. Thank you.
Fantastic job. I'm just going to stop the recording now.
Okay.